Like any other kid, my first plastic model was a P-40 Warhawk with the iconic shark's mouth, which is probably one of the most renowned symbols of World War II. 7 years ago, I had the opportunity to finally fly in one. As soon as I got in it, I realized that this airplane fits. It is the airplane that was built for me and my experience and what I want to do in aviation.
Could it be that the secret to winning in the skies wasn't elegance or velocity, but pure resilience? By the time 1941 rolled around, the Japanese Zero was dominating the skies with its agility and redefining aerial combat. But amid the chaos, one rugged American fighter held its ground, a machine that refused to back down, no matter the odds.
The Zero fighter, a source of terror to British and American pilots who knew that their aircraft were completely outclassed.
The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk was a fighter that couldn't outrun its rivals, couldn't outtwist them in a dogfight, but simply refused to break. This is the anatomy of an underdog. When the Warhawk first entered the Pacific theater, it was like a prizefighter jumping into a knife fight. By 1941, aerial combat had turned into a graceful dance of speed and finesse, one led by Japan's nimble Mitsubishi A6M Zero. Before we dig further into the Warhawk saga, tap like and subscribe to Titan's Arena. Your support lets us keep uncovering the hidden stories behind history's toughest warbirds.
The Zero was made effectively in one piece, no bolts holding the wings on. It's also got holes wherever there can be holes, which don't affect the rigidity of the aircraft, and it's made of a new material, which is actually lighter than aluminium and not available to the Americans till the end of the war.
The Mitsubishi A6M Zero could pivot in midair with the agility of a dragonfly. The P-40, by contrast, handled more like a freight train. Its 1,100 horsepower Allison engine was tuned for low-level punch, but wheezed above 15,000 feet. On paper, the Warhawk's top speed, about 360 miles per hour, looked respectable, yet that advantage vanished the moment a turning fight began. In a tight turn, that paper advantage disappeared. Even its firepower, 2 50 caliber guns in the nose and 4 in the wings, seemed overkill, like swinging a broadsword in a fencing duel. Yet beneath the Warhawk's rugged skin was a blueprint for survival. Curtiss designer Donovan Berlin built the P-40 not to outrun opponents, but to outlast them.
American fighter airplanes at the beginning of the Second World War, they don't stand much of a chance against the Zero in air-to-air combat.
So if you're a single American aircraft, what you realize is the void.
Every element of the Warhawk screamed practicality. The cockpit sat inside a shell of armor plate and bullet-resistant glass protection, a Zero pilot could only dream about. Self-sealing fuel tanks, lined with vulcanized rubber and layered fabric, closed over bullet holes in flight. Even the engine bay and coolant lines wore armor, shrugging off hits that would cripple lighter fighters. Structurally, the P-40 was overbuilt. Boxbar wings could absorb up 7.5 Gs without bending. The Warhawk's landing gear struts, forged from solid steel, soaked up impacts that would snap a Zero's spindly legs. Test pilots at Wright Field joked the P-40 demanded a school teacher's patience and a lumberjack's grip. Yet, in a dive, the aircraft felt almost eerily stable. During 1941 trials, one Warhawk dropped from 25,000 feet, hitting 480 miles per hour. Its wings trembled, but held no doubt a sight that made Mitsubishi's engineers wince. Where Zero engineers shaved off every ounce of redundancy to keep the aircraft alight, Curtiss went the opposite direction. The P-40's fuselage was braced with extra spars and internal support-sated weight. Stateside training soon proved its worth. Warhawks earned a reputation for shrugging off punishment that would splinter more delicate airframes.
Dive away from it and get the hell out of there. Number one thing that American pilots are being told is don't dogfight the Zero.
By 1941, most Pacific dogfights took place below 15,000 feet, the very altitude range where the Allison engine hit its sweet spot. In that band, the P-40 could dive faster and cruise quicker than the Zero. Enter Claire Chennault of the American Volunteer Group, was the leader of the legendary Flying Tigers. He saw the P-40 not as a ballerina but as a brawler heavily armored and able to take punishment other aircraft couldn't. Chennault joked the Warhawk was built not to dance but to take a hit and swing back. That line became the core of his doctrine: win with toughness, not pirouettes. His pilots quickly learned every quirk of the machine. The rudder took real leg strength, but once the Warhawk was banked, it held its line like a railgun. 6 50 caliber guns, harmonized to converge at roughly 250 to 300 yards, turned every strafing pass into a storm of metal. Detractors nicknamed the Warhawk a flying anvil, yet its weight doubled as a shield. By 1942, the Warhawks had taken on an almost mythical quality. The elegant Zero simply wasn't built to endure the punishment a P-40 could absorb. Its wafer-thin skin and unprotected fuel tanks made every duel a roll of the dice.
First of all, it was what they came to call an origami aircraft, an almost paper aircraft, because in order to achieve its fantastic performance and nimbleness, it had to be incredibly light. And that made it very frail, very vulnerable, that if you hit it, it fell to pieces.
The P-40 became more than an aircraft, was a mindset. In a theater where supply lines spanned oceans and spare parts were scarce, durability turned into hard currency. Zeros suffered in tropical heat and coral grit, but the Warhawk's steel bones brushed off rot and rough airstrips. In the end, its very simplicity became its greatest strength. Even rookie mechanics, armed with nothing more than a wrench and a flashlight, could keep a Warhawk flying. By the time sleeker, faster Allied fighters arrived in 1944, the P-40 had already written its own legend, the underdog that bent the rules, weaponized its shortcomings, and won over its harshest critics. Yet mere survival wasn't enough. The Warhawk was going to change the war. It had to rewrite the entire playbook. Claire Chennault did more than notice the P-40's flaws, he turned them into weapons. Chennault was a weather-beaten Texan with a fighter pilot's reflexes and a chess player's mind. In China, he spent years studying Japanese air tactics. By 1940, he knew Japanese pilots loved tight acrobatic dogfights, a habit they carried into their new Zero fighter. They were about to meet a commander who could use physics itself against them. In 1941, Chennault took command of the American Volunteer Group. He inherited only a handful of P-40 Warhawks and pilots as green as the jungle below their wings. Most had never fired a shot in combat. His answer was a ruthless, unconventional rulebook. Never turn with a Zero. Attack from the sun, strike once, then dive away. That playbook rested on two simple facts. First, the Allison engine climbed like a city bus on a steep hill, but down low, its torque was superior. That power let the Warhawk dive like an anvil, fast, straightened, deadly. Second, the Zero's light frame was perfect for tight maneuvers, but simply couldn't handle the stress of high-speed dives. Chennault drilled his aviators in what would later be called boom and zoom tactics. Start high, plunge fast, fire and ride the P-40's momentum back to safety before the enemy could even roll to follow. The Chinese government sweetened the deal. Each pilot earned a bonus $500 for every confirmed Zero they shot down. That reward sat on top of a monthly salary of $600 to $700. In China's harsh, undersupplied skies, the bonus felt like a small fortune. One more reason to face the odds.
Come in at high altitude, make screaming diving attacks against Japanese formations, take the energy that they built up, zoom climb up to a high altitude again, and come back around. He told his pilots, do not dogfight with the Japanese airplanes. It was certain death.
On the 20th of December, 1941, high above Kunming, China, Chennault's strategy faced its baptism of fire. The Flying Tigers had no radar and were badly outnumbered, so they leaned on early warning Chinese spotters, who phoned in every sighting of approaching aircraft. 10 P-40s clawed up to 18,000 feet. vanishing into the glare of the morning sun. Beneath them, 10 unescorted Mitsubishi Betty bombers droned toward the city, blissfully unaware. At Chenault's command, the Warhawks rolled over and plunged almost vertically toward their prey. The Allison engine howled as the airspeed indicator crept toward 480 miles per hour, a pace no Japanese aircraft could match without tearing itself apart. The enemy gunners never even saw us coming. The Flying Tigers, boom and zoom attack, turned the sky into a shooting gallery. 50 caliber rounds punched through the Betty bombers' unarmored fuel tanks, setting them ablaze. In minutes, 6 bombers spiraled into Kunming's rice paddies. The remaining 4 dumped their bombs and fled. Every Warhawk returned intact. Chenault calculated that a 45-degree dive let the Warhawk's nose-mounted guns line up exactly with a bomber's wingspan, boosting hit probability. Chenault instructed his pilots to close in to roughly 300 yards, almost point-blank, before squeezing the trigger. Japanese leaders first wrote off these hits as lucky breaks, but by February 1942, the Flying Tigers had racked up 299 confirmed victories, all while losing far fewer P-40s than other Allied units.
To train someone to be a pilot is a very complex process.
What really matters when you train a pilot is how many hours he's flown before he's thrown into combat.
Zero pilots, trained for graceful 101 dogfights, were left bewildered. One Japanese crewman complained the Flying Tigers hit like hawks and disappeared, a tactic few could counter. Chenault's genius was exploiting that imbalance. While Japanese doctrines celebrated honor and individual flair, he built a system. Every mission ended with a 2-hour debrief. Gun camera film dissected frame by frame. Fuel logs scrutinized line by line. Pilots memorized the Zero's blind spots, its flimsy rear armor, its slower roll to the left, and the engine that coughed during negative G dives. Chenault's mantra was simple: fight the airplane, not the pilot. The Warhawks' sheer toughness made that doctrine lethal. Chenault's squadron also learned to turn the Warhawks' mass into an asset. Chenault's playbook soon became mandatory reading for U.S. squadrons throughout the Pacific. Japanese pilots, exasperated by his tactics, started steering clear of head-on clashes. But his most important victory was psychological. He proved that ingenuity outweighs specifications, and that a so-called obsolete fighter can become a predator when flown with the right mindset. By 1945, most Warhawks had been stripped for parts, their famous shark-mouth nose art fading in scrapyards. Yet during those crucial early years, the P-40 did the unthinkable. It turned obsolescence into opportunity, desperation into doctrine, and raw steel into legend. Today, when a restored P-40 Warhawk roars past at an airshow, crowds still stop and stare, proof of the living monument it has become. So what do you think? Was the P-40 a masterclass in adaptation, or merely a lucky stopgap? Tell us in the comments. Smash that bell and join us for the next episode of Historic Fighters. World War II may be more than 80 years behind us, but these aircraft and the brave pilots who flew them must never be forgotten. Thanks for tuning in.